Hello, geometry students. Mr. Zacek with you, back and better than ever. Starting Unit 7, but we're going to do some review of algebra here before we get into the new content in Lesson 7. We're going to look at solving quadratic equations. We have three methods that we can use to solve quadratic equations, just to review from algebra. Okay, so the method number one is we can solve by factoring. And when we factor, we're going to look for a greatest common factor is going to be part of it. And then I'm going to use a method called a box method. I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. Okay, factoring sometimes works. So when it does work, it tends to be a little bit quicker than some of the other methods. The second method is using the quadratic formula. And this works always. So the quadratic formula is going to be on your formula sheet, but to help you remember it, it's x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Any quadratic equation can be solved with the quadratic formula. Any quadratic equation can be solved with the quadratic formula. We got x. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. This always works, okay? So definitely need to know that. And the other method is complete the square. We're going to do this in a lab, in our next lab, so we'll go over that. I'm not going to do that in this particular video. We'll focus on the first two. Okay, so we look at A, and we see that we have a value. Now, quadratic equations are in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So in this particular one, A is 7, B is 6, and C is -1. We want to have it set equal to 0. So I'm going to try and factor this. And when I factor, I look for a common factor. I don't see any of those. And so the method that we've kind of learned in algebra to do this is we take the first term, 7x squared, and we take c and we write them there. And then we multiply a times c. Okay, so a times c in this case is going to be -7. And we're looking for the factors of -7 that will add to be the b value. So it's the factors of a and c that add to b. So what will multiply to be -7 and add to be +6? Well, -1 and +7. So then I can write those, I'm just going to add an x to it, -1x and 7x. Now at this point, what I want to do is, for each row in my box and each column, I want to factor out the GCF. So I look here, I got 7x squared and 7x. They have a common factor of 7x. And then I've got -1x and -1. That has a factor of -1. And then let's do the columns. 7x squared and -1x squared. That just has a common factor of x. And then 7x and 1, and this would be +1. And the nice thing about setting it up this way is I basically have my check built in. Does 7x times x equal 7x squared? Does -1 times x equal -1x? 7x times +1 is 7x, and -1 times +1 is -1. Okay, now what that's done is I've created my binomial factors. So 7x minus 1 is one binomial factor, and x plus 1 is the other binomial factor. Okay, so I set these two equal to 0. I use something called the zero product property. And then we solve those two. Sometimes people will put a line down the middle of that to help them differentiate. So add 1, divide by 7, and over here we subtract 1. And so the solutions to this are going to be 1/7 and -1. Okay, so that is solving by factoring. In B, I look at this and I see there's this a value that's negative. We don't like to factor with the a value is negative. So the a value is -3, the b value is -5, and the c value is 1. I'm going to go ahead and solve this by I'm going to solve this by completing the square, or not completing the square, the quadratic formula. So x equals the opposite of b. So the negative of -5 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. We got to be careful with our signs here. All over 2a. All right, so we have x equals the negative of -5 is +5 plus or minus. And then what I like to do is simplify this whole thing inside of the parentheses here all at the same time. So if we go to our calculator here, and I put this in, is this showing up here for me? So -5. I don't know why my screen is not showing up on here. All right, well, I'm not sure why that's not showing up, but -5 squared is 25 plus 12. Okay, because 4 times 3 would be -4 times -3 would be 12 times 1. So this is going to be 37 all over 6. Okay, so we really have two answers here, and those answers are going to be, one of the answers is x is 5 plus the square root of 37 over 6, and the other answer is 5 minus the square root of 37 over 6. Now, if the square root of 37 would simplify, we could sort of see if there's a perfect square that goes into it, but in this case it doesn't. Approximately, this as a decimal comes out to be 1.84713, and this one is be 5 minus, just putting this in my calculator here, square root of 37 over 6 is -0.18046. Okay, so we've got them, we can kind of answer those either way. All right, so that's a quick overview. I'm going to do one more. Your assignment is going to be to do these ones 1 through 12 on a separate sheet of paper. Let me just go ahead and do number 1 with you right now, okay? And number 1 is x squared plus 5x minus 14. I'm going to go ahead and see if we can factor this. Okay, so 1x squared and -14. The nice thing is when the value of a is 1, it's a little bit of a shortcut, and I'll show you what I mean here. So 1 times -14 is -14. The factors of -14 that add to be 5. Well, that would be -2 and +7. So -2x and 7x. Whoops, I forgot the equal 0. So x and x, and here's what I mean when the shortcut, it's just the GCFs are just going to be these factors here of -2 and 7. So this would be x minus 2, x plus 7. Doesn't matter which order you go. If you wanted to do x plus 7 first, then the x minus 2, that's fine. Because they're being multiplied together, we can switch the order. So we set them both equal to 0, so x would be 2, or x would be negative 7. Okay, so you're going to go ahead and do those. Just give you a couple of pointers. On number 9, you have to do the GCF. Okay, number 10 is going to be the difference of two perfect squares. These are factoring things that we worked on in algebra. All right, and then number 11 and number 12, we got to make sure first that you set them equal to 0. Okay, now if you get stuck with the factoring, go ahead and do the quadratic formula, because the quadratic formula will always work. The formula is going to be given to you, but some of you have, strong enough factoring skills and you remember that thing, and the factoring piece will save you time. Okay, so your assignment is going to be to finish these next 11 questions on a separate sheet of paper. All right, good luck. Let's keep asking questions, and I will see you soon.